Guys, it's Bobby Lamarco, the Fantasy Football X Factor. We're going to talk about Week 1. I'm going to dive into all the changes that went on this offseason that's going to impact Week 1. Some player changes, but also coaching changes on the defensive side of the ball. Just some things I've looked at. So today's podcast is kind of the new Fantasy Football Databank, where it's just going to be a bunch of information every week. Every Saturday I'll be rolling this out, so I'm pretty excited to go over things today that could truly impact Week 1. Obviously, some things I'll be talking about too is player props. If you're into gambling a little bit, talk about those. I also want to touch on just general things about start sits. First off, make sure you're checking out my articles on Razzball. I talk about the shadow coverage report. Key players like Amari Cooper, for example, might not want to be started this week going up against Jalen Ramsey. And I also have a new article that came out today that's on expand the box score. There's 5 key players that I'm actually watching, keeping an eye out for based on the opportunities analysis. Deeper sleepers, some guys that might not have even been drafted. A couple guys you already know I love, like Logan Thomas and Paris Campbell. So go check that out on Expand the Box Score. So let's dive into the game. So first game we're going to talk about is the New York Jets versus the Buffalo Bills. The good thing about both these teams, there is no coaching changes, so we kind of have an understanding of how these teams operate from a coaching standpoint. Where the things that are going to change, though, is on the defensive side of the ball for the New York Jets. So obviously Jamal Adams, their safety, is now in Seattle. That's a big thing for tight ends playing this team this year. So Dawson Knox, obviously I'm not too excited for him in general with John Brown, Cole Beasley, and of course Stephon Diggs. But just moving forward, keep that in mind now that Jamal Adams is gone. Their other safety is hurt right now, but just want to talk about that stuff. That's a key one right there. They're also going to be down 3 of their linebackers from the previous year, so that's good news for a guy like Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, as that linebacking core for the Jets is not great. Now, the Jets' run defense overall is still very good. The defensive line is solid, so not the best matchup. Might be better for pass-catching numbers, but of course Josh Allen runs a lot, so I'm not really too excited. Either running back, I'm probably taking a wait-and-see approach on the Bills' backfield. And when it comes to the Buffalo Bills defense and how, that situation, it's pretty status quo. They got a lot of the same guys coming back. They have the same coaching staff. You're going to probably stay away from Bashard Perriman this week versus Tre'Davious White. The one name, of course, I'm going to be watching, one of the key 5 guys in my opportunity analysis I'll talk about this week, is Chris Herndon. Herndon has 2 very tough matchups in weeks 1 and 2 versus the Bills this week, 49ers next week. But after that, his schedule really opens up. Name to monitor, check his routes. We'll talk about him next week to see how many targets he might get. I think this is still a winnable matchup. He's a lock nearly for 5, 6, 7 targets in this game. So I think that he's definitely someone that you can monitor. Might be a great stash as a tight end too. Now the next game we're going to talk about is the Packers versus the Vikings. Another 1 p.m. game. And the biggest thing for them, the coaching changes. Gary Kubiak for the Minnesota Vikings taking on play calling duties. Now, I know this doesn't seem like a big deal, but it really is. Kevin Stefanski was a first-time OC, and now you have Gary Kubiak, who has been an OC for years. So I think this is a big news for this offense. Losing Stephon Diggs opens up a lot of availability and targets. Adam Thielen going up against Jair Alexander in week 12 of 2018. If you saw my article about shadow coverage report, Adam Thielen had a big game against Jair Alexander and the Packers. So not fading Adam Thielen this week. I like him a lot. I think that the key departures on the Vikings side or additions overall, Daniel Hunter, who's hurt, the defensive tackle, but they did get, I can't even pronounce his name, the guy from the Jaguars, very good pass rusher. Nagwe, don't even know how to say it. So, the Vikings did lose Hunter. They did get Nagwe from the Jags, so that's good. It's a little bit of an offset, but Hunter was an elite run defender. Nagwe is more pass rush, so it could be good news for a guy like Aaron Jones in this matchup, a little bit of a boost for him. We're also pretty interested to see how Jamal Williams and A.J. Dillon shake up behind him. Now, a couple of the departures that are important to note about the Green Bay Packers. Now let's flip over to the Packers side. No changes from the coaching staff. Now the biggest thing to know about them is they have completely different linebackers. Blake Martinez is gone. B.J. Goodson is gone. They're 2 starters from last year. That is notable in the run game. There is some new guys for the Green Bay Packers. That's good news for Dalvin Cook. Obviously, they're switching guys out, so some less continuity there. Also, as we know with the Vikings, completely new corners. All their corners are pretty new. Mackenzie Alexander, Trey Waynes, and also Xavier Rhodes, all gone. So this new secondary, brand new corners, I don't think anybody keeps up with Davante Adams. He is a beast. I think he eats this week versus this secondary. A lot of young Vikings cornerbacks. Not really sure they're going to keep up with him. Now, floating down to the next game we'll talk about is the Eagles versus the Washington Redskins. I know this is not exciting, it's just me on the screen, but I'm just giving you all the information. You'll have it, you take it, do what you want with it. Now, the one thing I will say is the Eagles versus the Washington Redskins, let's focus on the Redskins first. Lots of changes with Ron Rivera now in town, Scott Turner. I talked a lot about this in previous posts, but Scott Turner's offense is completely different. It's great news for Terry McLaurin. McLaurin will be more of a focal point. There'll be a lot more pass volume for this team, so I think that's very key. I also love Logan Thomas. Logan Thomas is one of the players I talk about in my article I posted this week, Names to Monitor from the Opportunities Analysis. Logan Thomas, to me, the Eagles, the one thing that people have to realize with the Eagles, they lost Malcolm Jenkins, my apologies, the safety. He was the key guy in stopping tight ends last year. He's gone. He's now in New Orleans. So Logan Thomas is quietly going to be a very interesting start this week. I think he's a guy you just slap at the end of your bench, see how he goes, because week 2, he has the Arizona Cardinals. So if you're interested in a guy like Logan Thomas, see how many targets he gets. If you have the room on your bench, throw him down there, see what happens, because week 2 against Arizona could be a big, nice blow-up week for Logan Thomas. Now, other notable things about the whole transition from Ron Rivera's defense is that, it's a new look. It's going to be a new look defense. Ron Rivera uses a lot of man coverages. He used a lot of shadow coverage with James Bradbury. They don't have a notable corner. Actually, one of their top corners is going to be out of this game, Kendall Fuller. So that's notable because now it's a weakness for this secondary. Their best corner is probably not going to play in this game. So that's good news for a guy like Deshaun Jackson, especially with Miles Sanders now out. Less reliance on the run game. Could be a big week for Deshaun Jackson. He's one of my favorite starts this week at the flex position. I think he can have a huge game against a very weak and young and inexperienced secondary of the Washington Redskins. Something on the flip side, if we want to talk about this too, Ronald Darby is now switching teams. Darby had a down year last year. He was very good early on in Buffalo, hasn't really been the same since, so not really scared about Darby. So I think Deshaun Jackson has a big week. Flipping over to the Philadelphia Eagles, continuity is key. This team does have all the same coaches, but some key guys that are now a part of this team are going to be Darius Slay, who could become a new shadow corner. He is in one of my original articles about shadow coverage. Jim Schwartz, the defensive coordinator, does not use a lot of man-to-man, so he does not use a lot of he doesn't use shadow coverage for his corners before, but he hasn't had a guy like Darius Slay. So Slay versus McLaurin is something I'll be monitoring this week. I'm very interested to see if there is any type of shadow coverage because Slay is one of the very few corners that does kick inside from his days with Detroit. So that's something to talk about with him. The other thing I want to talk about too is some of the injuries to this defense, to the team. So Thomas Davis came in. He was supposed to be the veteran linebacker for the Redskins. He's now out. That's just good news. I mean, I think Boston Scott, to me, and Corey Clement are going to be very interesting options this week. I think Boston Scott in any half-point, full-point PPR is a great option, so I would definitely consider starting him, play him in DFS, especially in DraftKings where it's full PPR. I think he's a very dark horse guy, especially with his low costs. Javion Hargrave, who's the defensive tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the Eagles have one of the best fronts in football, so it is a little bit of a ding, but Antonio Gibson is going to be an exciting player. He could be this year's 2017 Christian McCaffrey, where he gets a boatload of over 100 targets, over 100 carries. Very solid, very useful for fantasy. So I think Antonio Gibson is someone I'm excited about. Maybe not a start this week necessarily, but something to monitor. Eagles were a little susceptible to pass-catching RBs. All right, let's talk about the Browns versus the Ravens. And the biggest things for here is obviously the Browns. Talk about them first. Is the moving to Kevin Stefanski, Alex Van Pelt as the offensive coordinator. Looks like Kevin Stefanski will be calling plays. And Joe Woods is now their defensive coordinator. Joe Woods was the defensive coordinator for the Broncos for a couple seasons in 2017 and 2018 before becoming the linebackers coach for the 49ers. Now, Let's talk about the offense first. Obviously, Stefanski, bringing in Austin Hooper, still have Odell, Jarvis Landry, Njoku, Kareem Hunt's re-signed, Nick Chubb, a lot of mouths to feed. Based on what we've seen last year, neither tight end, Kyle Rudolph or Irv Smith under Stefanski, was fantasy viable. Diggs and also Thielen were both, they underperformed from where they were drafted because of the low pass volume. Now, when I talk about my opportunities analysis, there's no way that this is going to be the same Vikings team that had 502 dropbacks last year. It's not going to happen under the Cleveland Browns. Stefanski was with the Vikings since 2006. He's not just a one-year guy. That's the 1 year you look at. No, if you look at through the whole time, there's going to be a lot more pass volume, but compared to 2019, it's going to be very similar from the pass volume perspective. So I'm a little concerned for Kareem Hunt's passing game targets, because now you have Austin Hooper and a healthy David Njoku, and then all of them kind of cancel each other out. That's why I wasn't too high on any of them this season. Even Nick Chubb, to me, I was taking other guys in the second round. I do love Nick Chubb because of some of the changes they made up front, bringing in Jack Conklin in their first-round pick, but I'm still kind of a little wary of the fact that Kareem Hunt's there. He's going to be a 1B. He's going to take touches, but he also probably be in the passing game. Nick Chubb's not going to have the same value. He's still a threat to lead the NFL in rushing because of his usage and his great running ability. So, listen, if you draft him, you're playing him, of course. Now, just some new additions that we want to talk about, too, that I think is very important. So, Joe Woods, that, one thing I did notice, and something that's good from Mark Andrews, player prop of the week, 3.5 receptions from Mark Andrews. He had at least 4 last year against this team. Joe Woods, his Broncos defenses were not good against the tight end either. So I'm not even worried about Mark Andrews. I think he can get you 4 catches and get you some money if you're looking for player props. The one thing that is notable about the Browns that kind of flew under the radar is they did add a lot on the defensive side as well. So outside of, of course, Denzel Ward, very good cornerback, but they added 2 new safeties. Andrew Sendejo, who actually followed Kevin Stefanski over, is now at safety next to Carl Joseph, the former first-round pick from the Raiders. So they did beef up those 2 secondary safety spots. Neither guy really scares me from Mark Andrews, but at the same time, it is notable. They could be a little bit better against tight ends after being one of the worst last season. They also brought in B.J. Goodson from the Green Bay Packers, who actually is replacing Joe Shorbert, whatever his name is. He went to Jacksonville. So some flipping there at the linebacker position. Not really. I don't think it's going to be much of a big difference between those 2 guys. But I think the biggest takeaway from this is brand new coordinators, brand new team. I think Mark Andrews, you keep rolling with him. I'm interested with Greedy Williams being injured if they use Denzel Ward to shadow Marquise Brown. So that's something to look at. We'll be monitoring that. I don't think you sit Marquise Brown in any way, but that could be something that's notable if we see that next week. We'll talk about that. Make sure you read my article because I'll have updates each week. Now, the Ravens, I think, is really important to remember. It's pretty much status quo coaching staff-wise. They brought in Calais Campbell to really beef up that defensive line. They have 2 great corners, obviously. I think one of the things that I am really interested to see is how Lamar Jackson looks in his second full season under Greg Roman. They did lose Marshall Yanda, so that is big news. They did replace Marshall Yanda, and they brought in veteran guard DJ Fluker. So that is something worth noting. All right, let's see. All right, Colts, Jags. Obviously, the biggest coaching change is going to be Jay Gruden. Jay Gruden coming in is big news. Obviously, I talked about this in my previous post, but I just want to make sure everyone understands that Chris Thompson coming in is big news. Josh Robinson, see how that works out, that running back duo this week. Obviously, you're not starting either one. You're not going to be starting either one of them ideally, but at the same time, it's just worth monitoring. They should be on your benches as stashes this week versus the Colts, because the Colts have a pretty nasty front. Obviously, the Colts coaching staff is staying the same, but they brought in DeForest Buckner at defensive tackle. They also brought in Xavier Rhodes to replace Pierre Desir at the cornerback position. Obviously, Rhodes didn't have a great season last year, but at the same time, could be a solid number 2 for this team. And then for the Jags, it looks obviously we talked about the Ngagwe or whatever his name is going to Minnesota, so that is a big loss for them. So I think that's something that is worth a note. They also lost A.J. Boye this year, Calais Campbell this year. They did replace Calais Campbell with Timmy Jernigan from the Philadelphia Eagles. And Joe Sherbert from Cleveland came over to play at the linebacker position, so it is worth noting. And, of course, they drafted C.J. Henderson at corner. So I think for the most part, you're going to play your Colts guys. You're going to play Mac. This matchup is probably a smash spot for him. And, Jonathan Taylor, to be honest with you, I don't know what to say. I will tell you this. I did look into previous years. I mean, this reminds me a lot of Derrick Henry. I mean, Derrick Henry was a second-round pick behind DeMarco Murray. Murray still had a monster season. Carlos Hyde was drafted in the second round behind Frank Gore. Frank Gore still had a big season. A lot of these teams draft these guys a year ahead of time to get them in their system, to get them to understand the scheme, to see if they're a fit, and then they have them ready to go when these guys leave in free agency. So I might be a little bit more leaning towards Marlon Mack for this week, but the one thing I will say about Frank Wright is that he has a past of bringing in rookies if they're the best player. Saw it with time when he's an offensive coordinator for the Chargers. He actually used Brandon Oliver his rookie season, and then he also used Melvin Gordon his rookie season after they've proven the fact that they were better options. So Jonathan Taylor, I think, is a great mid-year trade target. I don't know if he's going to get out to the hot start because I've seen so many times these second-round picks, third-round running backs, sit for a year behind the guy. They leave in free agency, and then they become the guy. Then the guy before them leaves in free agency and become the guy. So just something worth noting. Now, the Raiders, Panthers, this game's going to be is interesting because the Raiders are a West Coast team traveling across the coast to an East Coast game for 1 o'clock. So those games usually have there's a huge red flag sometimes for West Coast teams that do that. So I think that's something that's worth monitoring for the situation. So it's just something to think about when you're looking at this smash spot. We don't even know really what's going on with the Panthers. I mean, Joe Brady, just to give you some insight about Joe Brady, obviously Joe Brady comes from LSU. We know him last year, but remember the 2 years prior, he was on the Sean Payton coaching staff, which explains why Teddy Bridgewater was brought over. So if you're interested in understanding that, that's something that's notable. It's going to be the same type of system, the same type of scheme. So DJ Moore becomes the Michael Thomas, Ian Thomas, etc. for Jared Cook or Greg Olsen. Those are Ian Thomas for Jared Cook. Those kind of looks and feels are the same kind of offense. So I think Christian McCaffrey is still a smash because of the Alvin Kamara / Mark Ingram role. It could be blended into one, which is insane. I don't think Teddy Bridgewater is going to drop back to pass 600 times this year. I think it's going to be much more of an efficient offense, but it's still going to be very young and raw. I'm not that excited. After this week, it gets very tough for them from a passing game standpoint. So just something to monitor with DJ Moore and also with Teddy Bridgewater. Now, the defensive coordinator is Phil Snow. I took a look at Phil Snow's history. He was actually a part of Rob Marinelli's coaching staff for Detroit for a couple years. And, it's notable. So Rob Marinelli was the longtime defensive coordinator up until last year for the Cowboys. So Rob Marinelli's, his defenses are typically better against the pass than the run. That's what I thought. And then when I looked into it, not the case. They actually are tougher against the run than the pass. Something that might be notable. It might be notable for this. I'm not really sure who Phil Snow is going to be, but if that means anything, the years in his time in Detroit, the Dallas Cowboys, they ended up somehow being better against the run versus the pass. So just something I thought was worth noting when you're looking at Phil Snow and how to judge this whole thing. But I'm still playing Josh Jacobs. I think he's a great play, but just something to think about when this new coaching staff comes in. Also, the losses for the Panthers are huge. Luke Kuechly, Eric Reed, and then also they lost James Bradbury. So those are some key, probably their three best defenders are now gone from last year, especially when covering anybody. So any coverage player, running back, tight end, wide receiver, you name it, is now gone. So I think that this matchup moving forward is going to be good, but it's worth noting that Rob Marinelli, from his time with the Cowboys, was very you got to beat us slow. You're going to incrementally beat us. You're not going to beat us deep. So maybe that's the kind of philosophy Phil Snow takes, where they don't allow a lot of explosive plays, but it's something we'll have to monitor. So for the Raiders, I just want to talk about something real quick for the Raiders and that team. So Corey Littleton is now the linebacker. Both linebacker spots are brand new for the Raiders, so could be an upgrade for them. Not really sure. They lost Carl Joseph, the safety, to the Cleveland Browns, so Just another thing that I thought was something worth monitoring. But overall, it's the same team. You're still going to attack them with tight ends. Maybe Ian Thomas is a sleeper this week. I'm probably not playing much of Ian Thomas until Teddy Bridgewater proves that he can keep more than just McCaffrey and DJ Moore as fantasy viable. Because last year we saw that it was only Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. Nobody else was fantasy viable when Bridgewater made his starts last year. All right. Next game we're going to talk about is the Bears versus the Lions. And really, the thing about the Bears and the Lions is, Matt Patricia's still there. His second year of Darrell Bevell, which is exciting from a Lions standpoint. Lions did have some changes in their secondary. They brought in Harmon from the safety from the Patriots. They also brought in Desmond Trufant, Jeffrey Okudah at the corners, and Jamie Collins from the Patriots as well. So they did make a lot of changes. This should be a better passing defense this season with those guys. Desmond Trufant's a solid corner. Jeffrey Okudah is a rookie. We will see. Camp reports are saying he hasn't even earned a starting job yet, so I'm interested to see how that works. But Okudah, Desmond Trufant, Jamie Collins, and Harmon are very good news for this team. So might be a little bit wary of, might be not as a smash spot for Mitch Trubisky based on his history. Mitch Trubisky's had some monster games against the Lions. The good thing about Mitch Trubisky is he is mobile, and the fact that Matt Patricia plays a lot of man allows him to run a decent amount. So maybe he can get you some points rushing the football. He could be like a DFS tournament play this week because of that. Now, another thing to talk about too for the Bears and their aspect of this is that Bill Lazor is going to take on his first game as offensive coordinator. And I've talked about Bill Lazor. He's been very good for run games in the past. He had Joe Mixon 2 seasons ago had his best season from an efficiency standpoint. And then back in the day, Lamar Miller with the Miami Dolphins before he went to the Texans had his best seasons under Bill Lazor. So unfortunately, the groin injury for David Montgomery is a red flag, but maybe if he starts, maybe if he sits out this week, gets healthy. I was excited for David Montgomery because of Bill Lazor, but obviously that's unfortunate. Obviously, the biggest news is going to be Kenny Golladay being out. So it's really a question of, do you start Marvin Jones? It's really just yes, because outside of Marvin Jones, you have T.J. Hockenson, who I absolutely love this week. I think T.J. Hawkinson's a fantastic he's an easy top 10 tight end this week. I've been big on him for all off season, so he's one of the guys I've talked about. So I'm starting T.J. Hockenson. I'm trying to start Marvin Jones where I can. Obviously, there is some circumstances where you might not be able to get him in based on where you drafted him, but with no Golladay potentially in this game, those guys need to be in. Also, Danny Amendola is hurt, so Danny Amendola, their slot receiver, could be banged up, could be limited. So really, it could be a two-man show. So try your best to get those guys in. The Bears' defense is not as fierce. They also just lost Clinton Dix from last year playing safety. So that's just more notable news for T.J. Hockenson. I think I'm in on Hockenson this week as a starter in pretty much all formats. All right, so Seattle versus the Falcons. And really, for this game, I'm actually interested because the Seattle Seahawks have made... All right, so let's start from the top. No coaching changes for either team, okay? So really, it's a player personnel changes. So really, let's talk about the Seahawks first. And the Seahawks have made a lot of changes. They were one of the worst teams last year covering the tight end. They have made some big changes at the safety position. They brought in Diggs from the Lions, and they also brought in Jamal Adams from the Jets. I think this defense is completely different. So I'm a big Hayden Hurst guy. But this game is not going to be a smash spot for Hayden Hurst anymore. I thought it was early on in this offseason, but when I started looking into this is probably one of the biggest takeaways. Hayden Hurst is not a must start in week 1 versus this Seattle Seahawks defense. They have very, very good safeties now with Adams and Diggs, who I think this team is going to do one of those teams that does a 180 when it comes to defending the tight end spot after a very down season last year doing so. So I think that's one thing to really talk about. They also beefed up their cornerback spot, bringing Dunbar over from Washington, the Redskins, formerly known as the Redskins. So I thought that was very actually notable for this team. And also Dante, so those are the major changes for the Seattle Seahawks team. Now let's flip over to the Atlanta Falcons. Now with the Falcons, it's, Desmond Trufant left in the offseason. They drafted A.J. Terrell in the first round to replace him. I'm not really sure what to say about that. I think DK Metcalf completely smashes this week. I think it's a big matchup for him. Mostly because also I was very surprised. Darqueze Dennard, the cornerback from the Cincinnati Bengals, who's actually a very good slot corner, is now playing for the Atlanta Falcons. And I think he might be able to slow down Tyler Lockett enough to make, I think the best matchup all day is going to be DK Metcalf on the outside versus Oliver and Terrell, instead of Tyler Lockett in the slot versus a Darqueze Dennard. So I think that's something that is very important this week. I would definitely consider DK Metcalf in all my daily fantasy lineups. I think he's going to completely blow up in this game. Very good news based on that. All right, let's talk about the Dolphins versus the Patriots in the next matchup. Obviously, a lot of continuity for these teams. Let's first talk about the Patriots. Start at the coaching changes. Obviously, there is none. It's Bill Belichick running the show once again. Cam Newton's coming in. Tom Brady's out the door. What is there to really expect for this team, especially with Mohamed Sanu now gone? It's really hairy, and it's going to be Edelman, and that's really it. I mean, a lot of young tight ends, a lot of uncertainty there. So I am very interested to see how that goes. Sony Michel looks to be a lock for big workload in week 1 with James White getting a lot of opportunities out of the backfield. So that's interesting from that standpoint. It's the Patriots defense that has a lot more personnel difference. They lost their safety Harmon, left in free agency, Kyle Van Noy, Jamie Collins, Dante Hightower, Patrick Chung, you name it. A lot of guys are gone now. The one thing that is certain, they still have rock-solid cornerback play. Those guys are all still there. They still have a lot of depth at safety as well, with McCourty as well. So that's just something that's worth monitoring for this team that, heading into week 1, I talked about my shadow coverage report. Devontae Parker had a big week 17 versus this team last year. I personally not buying it again. He had a 0 for 0 and 0 with 7 targets in the first matchup of the season. So just call me crazy, but I'm fading Parker in this matchup. Obviously with Stephon Gilmore set to shadow him again. From the Dolphins side, if you want to flip it around, there isn't much changes, but they did get Kyle Van Noy, ironically enough, and Byron Jones. So Byron Jones looks to be the new shadow corner. I talk about this in my shadow coverage matchup with Julian Edelman. Last year, Byron Flores did a very good job slowing down Edelman. He held them to basically, under 50 yards in both games. So I'm not really excited about Edelman, especially with Jones and Xavier Howard on the outside. Even if neither guy kicks inside, they're going to be able to focus a lot of attention on Edelman. I'm not expecting those young receivers on the outside to really beat Byron Jones and Xavier Howard. So I'm fading Edelman this week. If you could pivot away from him, I would do so. Next game we're going to talk about is the Chargers versus the Bengals. And I think the biggest thing's a lot of offseason buzz going on with this game. I think the biggest thing I want to talk about with the Chargers standing point, obviously, Ken Whisenhunt was fired midseason last year, and Shane Sarkisian, or whatever his name is, took over midseason. Trying to understand what the philosophy is going to be this year for this offense, moving from Phillip Rivers to Tyrod Taylor. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've talked about this a lot, the opportunity analysis is going to be a huge decline in pass volume. Tyrod Taylor has never thrown over 450 passes in a season. This team was 10th in the NFL in pass attempts last year at 597. So that's a huge difference. Even if we hedge a little bit in the middle, there's going to be about 75 to 80 targets going away from these guys. Obviously, the Mike Williams injury is big news. The Bengals as a defense is not that imposing, but their front is dominant. They don't have Geno Atkins this week. He is out with an injury, but they brought DJ Reader from the Texans. They brought in Mike Daniels from the Green Bay Packers. So they have a very deep defensive front. So yes, Geno Atkins not being there, big news for the Chargers. But overall, it's a very impressive front for the Bengals. But focusing more on Anthony Lynn, understanding what they're going to do with this offense. They're going to be under less in shotgun, more of the offense we saw in the Buffalo Bills days with Anthony Lynn. Anthony Lynn took over the Chargers head coaching job as a CEO. He kept both coordinators in there. I think there's going to be a big shakeup with this offense. So I'm interested to see how they implement it. Mike Pouncey is going to be out this week. They also have Trey Turner, their offseason acquisition, is banged up, could be out. So they could be down 2 starters up front. 2 of their good starters. So I'm a little concerned for everybody, especially with Mike Williams also being out. Hunter Henry and obviously Keenan Allen do have nice baselines because of the lack of other wide receivers on this team. Austin Eckler. So LaShawn McCoy's 16-game paces was about 70 targets on the season. So that's not terrible, but it's not over the 100 he got last year. So I'm a little concerned from that standpoint, especially with the offensive line banged up, going up a pretty solid run defense for the for a run up front for the Bengals. Could be a little bit of a slower start for Austin Eckler in that sense. Good news is they don't have linebackers at all. The Cincinnati Bengals linebacking core is now not really impressive. They lost Nick Vigil, who was one of their main guys last year. And they also are going to be down Sean Williams, who was one of their run-stuffing safeties last year as well. So some gives and takes in this game. I do feel that, we're interested in seeing, obviously, from the Bengals side, second year of Zach Taylor's offense, going into it with Joe Burrow now. They have a lot of depth. But one thing I will keep in mind, I talk about this in my shadow coverage report, is it's going to be A.J. Green versus Casey Hayward, Tyler Boyd versus Chris Harris. A deep sleeper in DFS tournament plays is John Ross. Ross was actually good last year. Believe it or not, the man was going on pace for 1,000 yards. He's a red zone threat. He's a deep threat. He just can't stay healthy. He's got the best matchup of any wide receiver in this game. If Casey Hayward does shadow A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd in the slot versus Chris Harris is not a great matchup. Both those guys I'm fading. John Ross is an interesting, throw at the end, deep sleeper. Obviously, I think he could have a big week going up against Michael Davis on the outside, opposite of Casey Hayward. All right. Cardinals versus the 49ers. Biggest thing is no changes for either coaching staff, so that is notable. Some of the additions are good, so let's talk about the Cardinals additions, because the 49ers kind of status quo from a player addition standpoint and departure. So Devon Kennard, who was a linebacker for the Detroit Lions, is now on the Cardinals, along with Justin Simmons, their first-round pick. They also added Drake Kirkpatrick, the cornerback from the Cincinnati Bengals. So they do have some interesting corners now between Byron Murphy, Patrick Peterson, and now Drake Kirkpatrick. Has a solid trio. I think this defense is still going to be beat by the tight end. I think George Kittle obviously has a monster week, but it is notable that they did make some changes to the linebacking core. They're definitely going to improve this year. They can't be as bad at covering tight ends as they were last year, but the strength of this defense is going to be their cornerback play with Patrick Peterson, Byron Murphy going into his second season, and also their offseason acquisition of Drake Kirkpatrick, who has performed pretty well in the past for the Cincinnati Bengals. Some of the notable injuries, of course, Deebo Samuel has been ruled out. I have not been a big fan of Deebo all season, off-season, because of the injury, but also because his cornerback schedule is brutal. He has 11 potential shadow coverage matchups this season. Good thing he's missing Patrick Peterson, because he would have been shut down in this game. I'm not buying much of Deebo. If you did draft him and you could get something for him, I would definitely give it a shot. Now heading to the Buccaneers and Saints. Obviously, from a coaching standpoint, nothing has changed. Tom Brady coming in, awesome. We're super excited. Emmanuel Sanders on the other side. Mike Evans potentially being out for this game is huge, because the boundary corners for the Saints are legit. So when you look at this team, Marshawn Lattimore and Janoris Jenkins on the outside, Chris Godwin's still the main slot guy. Even if Evans is out, Chris Godwin now has more target volume. He's going to play inside more. Scotty Miller and Justin Watson will be on the outside, so I'm still buying Chris Godwin. I don't think they're going to shadow Marshawn Lattimore on the inside with him. I don't expect the outside guys to win much, so if you're looking for Scotty Miller to be a sleeper, he's got to face Marshawn Lattimore and Janoris Jenkins on the outside. I'm not buying that at all. I think Gronkowski and O.J. Howard also have touch matches this week, because guess what? Malcolm Jenkins from the Philadelphia Eagles safety is now in New Orleans. So that's a very big matchup problem for the tight ends, because Malcolm Jenkins is one of the best safeties at covering tight ends. That's a big notable upgrade for the Saints defense. So it's going to be, I'm buying Tom Brady. I love Tom Brady. But the Mike Evans injury, Mike Evans is able to win some of the matchups versus Marshawn Lattimore. I don't see anybody beating Marshawn Lattimore and Janoris Jenkins on the outside if Evans is out. Big downgrade for Tom Brady. He might not be that lock number top 10 quarterback I thought he was before this injury. The one thing we do want to talk about, Marcus Davenport and Kiko Alonso are both out, so that is good news for the ground game. So Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones, some of the guys up front, the lineman Marcus Davenport, and also linebacker Kiko Alonso is one of their best tacklers last year, is out of this game. So something to monitor. It's good news for the run game. Maybe they have more success on the ground versus a very stout Saints defense against the run. So now we're heading into the Sunday night game, Cowboys versus the Rams. This is actually exciting. So first let's talk about the Rams because it's kind of status quo. Brandon Cooks is now gone. Van Jefferson, Josh Reynolds, will they run more 12 personnel? Honestly, I'm going to tell you this. I think the Cooper Kupp signing is this is obvious to me. Like, the best offense is 11 personnel. They ran it at 90%. Then they dropped down to about 70% over the last few weeks. But still, 11 personnel is what they want. That's why they re-signed Cooper Kupp. If Cooper Kupp can't win on the outside, or if they're going to run more 12 personnel, why would they sign Cooper Kupp to a mega deal? Doesn't make sense. They have Woods already locked up. They just drafted Van Jefferson. Josh Reynolds is a free agent after this season. They invested back in the wide receiver spot. I think they're going to be more 3 wide receiver sets than you think. I think Higbee and Everett are going to kind of flip in and out as that pass-catching role. I think they're going to keep the running backs in to block and allow the tight end to release on routes. That's my personal viewpoint on this offense. From a defensive side, they got Leonard Floyd to replace Dante Fowler at the defensive end position. So, I mean, it is what it is. That's a flip there. Clay Matthews is now gone as well. So just some of the things that kind of happened over the offseason. The one thing is notable, now we'll go to the Cowboys, is going to be Mike McCarthy. What is his scheme? Do not buy what everybody's telling you. This is not going to be the same offense. Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator now. But remember, Kellen Moore is not going to be calling plays from Jason Garrett's playbook. It's going to be Mike McCarthy's playbook. There's been multiple reports saying this. Just keep that in mind. So why is this important? A lot of people are talking about Blake Jarwin as being a breakout. I've been off Blake Jarwin because under Mike McCarthy for 19 seasons, only 2 times ever did a tight end produce at a tight end 1 level on a points per game basis, but also finish the season as a tight end 1. That's what you're looking for. Either you're looking for a guy who's a difference maker on a points per game basis, or you're looking for a guy who's, even if a guy finishes as a tight end 12, but he gets you 7 points a week, that's nothing. So I'm fading Blake Jarwin. Mike McCarthy's offenses are not conducive for tight ends. We saw it with Martellus Bennett, Jared Cook, Jimmy Graham, you name it. Jermichael Finley was the only guy to really do it big, and that was with 9.5 points per game and half-point PPR. So no one's even averaged double digits in fantasy at the tight end position under Mike McCarthy. I think it's great news. We've seen multiple seasons where Aaron Rodgers supported 3 wide receivers: CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, Mari Cooper. Love them all. However, this week, Mari Cooper is my biggest fade. Fade him, sit him everywhere, because he's going up against Jalen Ramsey. That shadow coverage is going to happen. They faced last year. He had 1 catch for 19 yards. Stay away from Amari Cooper. Bench him if anywhere you can. I promise you he's not going to have a monster week. Plus, they're on the road. His road splits have been terrible, even with the Cowboys. I'm fading Amari Cooper. I like Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb in this game. Love Zeke as always. One of the notable things about the Dallas Cowboys from a defensive standpoint is Byron Jones is gone. So this is good news for Robert Woods. For Cooper Kupp. Now, the biggest thing for the Dallas Cowboys defense is Mike Nolan is now the defensive coordinator. Nolan has been pretty solid. He was the Atlanta Falcons coordinator for a couple of years. He as recent was the linebackers coach for the New Orleans Saints. It'll be interesting to see if he implements a shadow corner in that defense, because the Saints did that. In Atlanta, he had Trufant in his younger years as a pretty dominant corner. So they don't have the great cornerback anymore with Byron Jones gone. They have Anthony Brown. That's really it. There really isn't anybody that notable. So I think from a Robert Woods, you're starting him. Cooper Kupp, you're starting him. And I think outside of that, listen, if you drafted Higbee, you got to roll with him. The Cowboys' defense has been pretty bad against covering tight ends. But there's a new defense in town. It's Mike Nolan's defense. That could be notable. All right, so Monday night we have the Steelers and Giants and the Titans and Broncos. So the Steelers, obviously, status quo from a coaching standpoint, but Big Ben is back. And the Giants' defense is going to be with a brand new coaching staff. So Patrick Graham is now defensive coordinator. If we look at the Steelers' offense versus the Giants' defense is going to be the same defense as you saw in Miami with Brian Flores and Bill Belichick. Patrick Graham is a Bill Belichick guy. So you're going to see a lot of man. James Bradberry was their key cornerback addition this season. James Bradberry is going to shadow number 1, so that means that Deontay Johnson on the outside could see a lot of James Bradberry because Bradberry does not kick to the slot. So you could see a lot of that. That's one of the matchups to monitor. I'm probably fading Deontay Johnson where I can because Bradberry could be shadowing him on the outside. I love Juju. Last year, the Giants were very bad at covering the slot. I'm not really sure how they're going to handle it this year. Because of that change, you're going to start Juju. You have to start Juju. The Giants don't have an imposing defense, even with the change in coordinator. I think really the only guy I'm worried about is Deontay Johnson. The one thing I will tell you, though, that they play a lot of man. So if you see that, there could be anybody. Eric Ebron could have a big game. We have seen Bill Belichick's defense take away the primary guy. We saw the Miami Dolphins last year try to do the same thing with Xavier Howard shadowing top guys. So I think that James Bradberry is going to take away Deontay Johnson. Going to see a lot of Juju, maybe some tight end help as well. The one thing that's notable about the Steelers offense is the stud guard, David DeCastro, is out. Good news is they brought in Steven Wisinski, the guard from the Kansas City Chiefs. Pretty solid backup. Not ideal for them, but you're still starting James Conner. Big game there as well. From the Giants, it's Jason Garrett. Jason Garrett coming in. What do you need to know about Jason Garrett? Now, Jason Garrett had many years with Tony Romo, with Dak Prescott. Obviously, this team is not going to be as high volume as they were under Pat Shurmur. There is a lot of mouths to feed in this offense, but the one thing I will tell you is Saquon Barkley is going to get a healthy dose on the ground, and then Evan Ingram is going to get plenty of opportunities at tight end. We saw it with Jason Witten for many years under Garrett. I do believe that he's going to continue to feature Evan Ingram, and I also think they have a true X receiver. It could be Sterling Shepard. Darius Slayton-Shepard, I'm sorry, I wish I had more answers, but we just saw for years it was first Bryant, Dez, and then they went and traded and got Amari Cooper. This offense is not going to be as pass-heavy as they were last year under Pat Shurmur. So someone's going to emerge. Whoever that true X is going to be, I'm pretty excited for them. But I really like Evan Ingram in this offense. He's my primary guy that I would want out of any of the Giants players, especially with Golden Tate banged up right now. So I think you can start, Slayton and Shepard, but honestly, I would rather take a wait-and-see approach to see who's the guy that emerges. My guess would be Shepard, but your guess is really good as mine. Final game, Broncos versus the Chargers. Obviously, the biggest coaching change is Pat Shurmur, so let's focus on the Broncos offense versus the Chargers defense first. Broncos offense versus the Titans defense first. So Broncos, Pat Shurmur comes in. Great news for Drew Lock. We saw him work with Daniel Jones last year. Pat Shurmur with a young quarterback. But there's going to be an influx of pass volume. Now with Cortland Sutton out, the good news is Adoree Jackson's out. So Adoree Jackson's the top cornerback for the Titans. So this is good news for Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy can get off to a decent start because outside of Adoree Jackson, Malcolm Butler is okay, but he was kind of up and down last year. Adoree Jackson was the best corner on this team, so that is good news. If Sutton's out, Jackson's out, look for Jeudy to be like a sleeper this week, especially with Drew Lock having limited options because KJ Hamler is also injured with his injury. So that's something that is notable. Now, from a offensive standpoint, also for the Broncos, is Melvin Gordon versus Phillip Lindsay. Now, with this combination, it'll be interesting to say the least who is going to be the 1A. But the one thing I want to talk about with Melvin Gordon, and the key for them is that he's going to get goal line work and he's going to get passing game work. So even if there is a split, I do like Melvin Gordon because he does fit the mold of what Pat Shurmur truly wants from a 3-down running back. He's going to get a lot of in the passing game, so I do like the fact that Melvin Gordon is going to get those key touches, which is why I'm still a little bit high on Melvin Gordon season long, even this week against a pretty good Titans defense. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is the Titans offense versus the defense of the Broncos. Obviously, Chris Harris, the stud cornerback, is gone. He went to the LA Chargers. Now, they replaced him with A.J. Boye. I don't think, and now you have to factor in Von Miller's out and Bradley Chubb. They're two defensive ends. I think Ryan Tannehill is going to have all day to throw. I think he's going to cook it. Even with the loss of Jack Conklin at right tackle, they did draft a young guy and also have Dennis Kelly to replace him. So let's roll it. I think you roll with A.J. Brown all day in this matchup. I love the fact that he has faced A.J. Boye and the Jacksonville Jaguars twice last year. In the second matchup when he was a starter, he lit him up. So start him with confidence. Also with the injuries to defensive end, I really like A.J. Brown. Titans defense does have some injuries as well. Vic Beasley will be out too, along with Dory Jackson. So those are all my thoughts for this week. Check that out. I'll be posting this every week, every Saturday. Make sure you go check out my articles on football.rasball.com and also Expand the Box Score each week on the opportunity analysis and shadow coverage report. Thanks for joining me again. We'll talk again soon.